The Travel Transformation Podcast is proud to be partnered with Give the Goodness Global, an amazing global outreach project helping families in need all over Southeast Asia and beyond. Please check them out at Instagram.com/Give the Goodness Global today. And now on to the podcast episode.
Welcome to the Travel Transformation Podcast, the podcast that explores the life-changing potential of solo travel, intentional travel, and location-independent working. Whether you're an aspiring digital nomad or simply want to boost your confidence through epic travel experiences, I'm here to motivate and inspire you to go after all your wildest dreams. I'm Jessica Grace Coleman, author, travel transformation coach, founder of Flip the Script Travel Transformation Services, and your host for the Travel Transformation Podcast. Travel changed my life. Now let's change yours. You ready? Let's go. Welcome to the Travel Transformation Podcast, where we talk all things travel and all things transformation. My name is Jessica Grace Coleman and I'm your host. And today I'm talking to Judy Bloomberg, author of the book, Always a Traveller, Never a Tourist, In Search of People and Places on the Road Less Travelled. Judy has been an intrepid traveller for 50 plus years and has explored over 120 countries on all 7 continents. Her lifelong fascination with traditional cultures led her to visit with people in some of the least known places on Earth, including Papua New Guinea, Ethiopia, rural Mongolia and Bhutan. Whenever possible, she immerses herself in the culture and daily life of the places she visits through village homestays, volunteer work, and participation in the celebrations and life cycle events of the inhabitants. When not travelling, she lives in Massachusetts with her husband Mark and plans her next adventure. I really love this, and Judy is such a fascinating person and has done so many amazing things and gone on so many incredible adventures, and she shows no signs of slowing down at all. I had a lot of questions and we got through about half of them, I think, because she's just got so many great stories and it really makes you want to go travelling in a less touristy way. And if you've never done this kind of travelling before, I think this episode might make you want to do it. So let's get to the interview. Hi, Judy. Thank you for coming on the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me, Jessica. I'm delighted to be joining some of you across the pond.
Nice. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for coming on. So for our listeners, please could you give a little bit of background about yourself, where you're from and where in the world you are right now? Because I know you travel around a lot. So where are you right now?
Right now, I am in Massachusetts in the United States. For those who don't know, that's the northeast section of the United States, about 5 hours north of New York by car. So about me, I've done a whole lot of things in my life. I've been a teacher, I've been an IT person, I've been a school psychologist, but now I'm retired. The thing I like to do the most is to travel, and I've traveled to about 120 different countries. So I've seen the mundane that everyone has seen, and I've seen some pretty unusual places. And the thing that was interesting about COVID is I got convinced during COVID to use my time at home when I couldn't travel to actually compile some of those photos and experiences into a book. And so I spent about 1.5 years pulling my most interesting and most unusual photographs from places like Ethiopia and Mongolia and Bhutan together and published a book. And I've been doing a lot of that since. But I'm back to traveling, which is great. Just a few weeks ago, came back from South America, including the Amazon. And I'm leaving in about 1.5 weeks to go to Malta, Tunisia, Algeria, and Spain. I don't usually have more than a couple of months at home before I'm off to someplace else.
Nice. That sounds like a very good idea to me. Now, I'm going to ask you about your book in a little bit, but your stats are very, very impressive. Like you said, you visited 120 countries on all 7 continents. Is that right?
Yes. I actually, hard to believe, I went in the year 2015, I was out of control and I actually visited all 7 continents in a single year.
Wow. Okay.
Which is something of a record.
That is amazing. Do you have a favorite? Is that a stupid question to ask? I know they're all so different.
I like Asia a lot, particularly Southeast Asia. I like Africa. But I've never met a place I didn't like. The place I go back to over and over again is Europe. There are some places that I'm really glad that I visited, but I don't feel the need to visit them 10 times. But Europe is a place that I feel very comfortable, especially France. I can tell you a little bit about my experience in France, living in France, but that's a country that I go to every year or two. I suppose you could say that's my favorite country. And also, I will be going to visit your country in a few months. In June,
Oh,
I'll be
nice.
going back to the UK.
Oh, great. Do you know where in the UK you're going, or are you going all around?
Yes, we well, a couple of days in London, of course, a few days East Anglia, but mostly in the Cotswolds. We rented a cottage in the Cotswolds in 2017 or 2018. And it was such a lovely cottage that we wanted to go back and spend a couple of weeks there again. Cotswolds are just beautiful.
They're one of my favorite places in England. Yeah, I love it. It's so quaint, so cute, so sort of quintessentially British, like the kind of British murder mysteries and things you watch are usually like filmed in those kinds of places. And yeah, I love them. Yeah, I think I might go back there this summer maybe, or autumn. Yeah, definitely. So you've been to Antarctica then, I'm assuming, if you've been to also. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because I have no reference for this.
We did a trip that was different from the ones that most people do. At the time, we went with the only company that was offering this trip. Now there may be one or two others, I'm not sure. But most people, most Americans start in Argentina and leave from Ushuaia. They go to the Antarctic Peninsula, which a lot of people don't know. It's not even below the Antarctic Circle, but that's the tip, very tip. And then they come back to Ushuaia. And then sometimes people from Australia and New Zealand leave from New Zealand and come back to New Zealand, and they see, one or the other pieces. We went on a trip that was 31 days long on a small expedition ship, and it started in Argentina and it ended in New Zealand. So we really got to see the whole coastline. We got to see the explorer huts, which most people who come from Argentina don't ever see. Those are the ones that Shackleton and Scott and so on left when they were evacuated in, the early 1900s, and they ran off with just the clothes on their black backs and left everything else behind. And if you go to those huts, you can see toothbrushes and socks hanging on the line to dry, and tinned food that has been there since 1912. And, it's just exactly as it was. So that was very cool. And we went to the dry valleys, which usually only scientists go to. It's an area hasn't gotten any rainfall for millions of years. People don't realize that Antarctica is actually a desert, and it's so dry there that nothing decays. So you could see like a dead seal lying on the ground there, but you would have no idea if that seal died yesterday or 5,000 years ago. The body doesn't rot.
Wow.
So that was fascinating.
That is really fascinating, because obviously I don't get to meet many people who have gone there. It's not high on most people's lists of places to go, but it sounds absolutely fascinating, especially the Shackleton stuff, all the things still there, like that kind of stuff blows my mind.
That was amazing, seeing exactly how they had left it. And the other thing that was wonderful was there was a crate that had Shackleton's signature on it, where he had signed for, the receipt of the supplies. He got them in England, I assume, but had brought them to Antarctica with him, but his signature was still on the crate.
Wow, that sounds like an amazing trip. That's so cool. So can you tell me how you got into traveling in the first place, especially the way you travel, which is a bit different to most? Were you always into travel? Did you always have that wanderlust?
Yes. When I was a kid, I don't think I did, but when I became a young adult, certainly. And when my husband and I got married, everybody, in the US at least, the thing to do was to go for a week in the best luxurious place you could find in the Caribbean and stay in a really high-end hotel and sit on the beach. And I said, that doesn't sound like much of a honeymoon. We should go to Europe, but we didn't have any money. So we just went for 2 months, and what was Europe on $5 a day, you might be too young to remember that, but That was the Bible for the budget travelers of its day. And we just went for 2 months with no itinerary. And now, as a parent, realizing the fear I must have instilled in my parents' hearts, because we said we're taking off and we don't know where we're going to be and you will have no way of reaching us. So that was kind of the beginning of it. And then in 1987, my husband decided that he wanted to go on a cruise. We had never gone on a cruise before. So again, what most people do is they go Carnival cruise to the Caribbean or something of that sort. And I said, oh, that doesn't sound that interesting. So I did some research and I discovered that you could go to the Amazon. So that was my first adventure trip. And we went to the Napo River, which is a tributary of the Amazon in Ecuador, and on a little tiny boat. And yeah, we saw, got introduced to 12-inch spiders and piranhas. And, I was kind of hooked after that of, just like I want to see things that are just different. So we went through a long period of time when we had kids and we had responsibilities and jobs, and we still traveled several times a year, but around vacation times and school vacations, things like that. And then I retired. I wasn't really ready to retire. I still enjoyed my job, which at the time was teaching French, but I realized that there wasn't enough time to travel if I had a job. So we retired and kind of got out of control for a while, and just like, if we're going for 2 weeks, we could go for 6 weeks or, whatever. And then there was France, we were at Epcot, which is a strange place to start this story. But my husband and I were sitting in the French pavilion having lunch, and I looked and I said, wouldn't it be wonderful to go to live in France? It's so quaint. And he was supposed to say, that's ridiculous. We have jobs, we have responsibility. Instead, he said, that sounds like a pretty good idea. So I was like, okay, well, what do I say now? So we quit our jobs, and knowing that we were of an age, we were both in our early 50s, which was not really old enough to retire, but old enough that we weren't guaranteed of finding another job so easily when we got back. But we were willing to take that risk, and we quit our jobs and we went to live in a very small village in France for a year. It was about an hour and a half from Paris, so we could travel into Paris once a week if we wanted to for the day. But we purposely chose not to live in Paris because we didn't want to be tourists, and we felt like in Paris, we would be treated as tourists the whole year. And in this village of 3,000 people, we were definitely not treated as tourists. We were treated as something of celebrities. I mean, they couldn't figure out what to do with us or why we were living in their little town, but we were able to become part of the community. And that was a really important thing.
Wow. How did you find that village? Did you online? Did someone tell you about it?
We made a couple of preliminary trips. We knew we wanted to be near enough to Paris to be able to go in for the day. And we drew a line of about an hour and a half distance by car and visited different villages and saw what we liked and what nearby and so on. And then we started looking for housing. And that actually proved to be substantially more difficult than I thought it would be, because it's easy to find a rented apartment on Airbnb or someplace like that for a week or even a month. But it would be hugely inappropriately expensive to try and go that route for a year. But if you rent an apartment for a year, it tends to be unfurnished. And we were not about to go out and buy furniture for it. So we were somewhat constrained by where we could find a year-long rental of a furnished house. And we actually found a listing there's a school in Fontainebleau in France called INSEAD, and it's an international business school. And so people come from all over the world and have this same sort of problem of having to rent furnished lodgings. And we found a listing on their bulletin board. We went ahead and did that. It was actually the vacation house of a couple who lived in Paris, and they decided they wanted to rent their weekend home for the year. And so we were lucky enough to get it.
Wow, that's amazing. So when was that, sorry?
That was in 2002 to 2003.
Nice. And have you been back since to that village?
We have. We kept in touch with some of the people. I have to say we're not actively in touch with them anymore because it's been 20 years. But for the first few years, we did go back and people invited us when we said we're coming back to visit. You know, they get 6 or 8 people together from the village and have a dinner party. And that was great. And the other thing that I did when I was there was I volunteered in the nursery school, the maternelle. And that was wonderful because it was fun to volunteer with the kids in the nursery school, just because kids are kids. But also it was a wonderful way to really integrate myself into the town and get to know the people. And we would go to parties or dinner dances, this town, because they didn't have lots of restaurants and movie theaters and whatever other entertainment. There were a lot of dinner dances where they would have catered dinners and bands and so on, and the whole town could sign up. And we would go, and French people can be a little bit reticent about going up to new people that they don't know, where they haven't been formally introduced. But the kids would go up because the kids always got invited to these parties as well. And they go up and they go, "Mama, that's the lady who comes to the school every Friday." And that was the way that the parents could have sort of an approved way of starting to talk to us without having some adult have formally introduced us. So it was a great way to really become part of things.
Yeah, that's really great. I love that. And I mean, your whole thing is being always a traveler, never a tourist. And I think something like that is a really great way of sort of getting in the community. And obviously, I don't think you don't really know a place until you know the people in it. So I really like your whole philosophy about all this. So you've been traveling for 50 plus years, is that right? So I have a couple of questions on this. So in those 50 years, have you ever been in like a super dangerous situation, whether it's wild animals or wild people, like, or, you know, anything dangerous? Because I think that's what puts a lot of people off traveling, but I want to know.
Okay, well, the wild animals, we've been on a number of safaris, and there have been a few times that elephants or lions have looked sideways at us, but never that I was really afraid. And I was never really afraid of people, but maybe I should have been. Probably the riskiest situations that I have been in is I've done a number of volunteer visits to Haiti. And that is a country that is in a great deal of turmoil. It's very sad because they're wonderful people, but they just had a very difficult time. Well, there was a group that was there for a week, but we didn't go with that. We went there for a whole month to do some other kinds of work. And during the time between when the main week-long group, they had left, and the next week-long group hadn't arrived yet, and we were just there by ourselves with the staff of the, it was an orphanage. Things got very difficult and politically, and they were afraid that there was going to be a revolution. And so the people who ran the program actually made us leave. They paid for us to go out of the country, and we stayed in Florida for a week until everybody decided that there was not going to be a revolution. And then we actually went back to finish our month-long visit there. And then the last time I went to Haiti, we almost didn't go because this was in 2018, I think. We almost didn't go because the situation with the gangs in Port-au-Prince was just getting very difficult. And the international airport is in Port-au-Prince. And we were supposed to get met with a car at the airport and driven 4 hours to a town called Gros Morne. And the person that we were going to see and the group that we were going to see said it's just not safe to go on the roads. I mean, people were being kidnapped, people were being, held up at gunpoint and robbed and so on. What they ended up doing was they arranged for a private plane. There's an organization called MAF, which stands for Missionary Air Fellowship. And they arrange planes to the craziest places in the world that the missionaries go to, but not many other people go to. We actually flew them into a remote area of Papua New Guinea as well. But our host in Haiti arranged for a private MAF plane to pick us up at the airport in Port-au-Prince and fly us to Gros Morne so that we would not have to be on the road. And then once we got to Gros Morne, I felt perfectly safe. But it's one of those countries where you have to really be in contact with somebody who's on the ground who can tell you where it's dangerous, where it's not dangerous, when to stay home, when it's okay to go out.
And in those moments, do you feel scared, or do you know that, you've got someone that you can tell?
I don't. I've never felt like my life was a danger. Maybe it's stupidity on my part. I don't know. But I've always trusted the people who were there.
And having traveled for 50 years, obviously a lot of things about travel has changed in that time. So are there any things that you can think of that you do now that you didn't do when you first traveled, or vice versa? Like, how has it changed, like the way you travel?
Oh, yeah. Like we have GPS. That's a big help. And we have cell phones. That's made a huge difference. When my husband and I went on our honeymoon in 1970, and I said, we told our parents, we don't know where we're going to be. You can't reach us. What we agreed to do was we would go once a week and make a phone call home to the States from wherever we were. And you had to go in most of the countries to make an international phone call. You had to go to someplace like the post office, which had a place that you could call and with an international operator. So you had to connect to the international operator, and it cost about $6 a minute. And it was a major thing. And now, people think nothing about texting 10 times a day back to their families and their friends, or calling, or we were in France about a year ago, and there was some reason why the internet connection that we were expecting to use for our GPS didn't hook up properly. And we were without GPS. We were in Nice, and we were driving to someplace about 2 hours from Nice. That was terror. I wasn't terrified in Haiti, but I was terrified in Nice because I didn't have my GPS, and I had no idea how we were going to find where we were going. And we ultimately did get the internet hooked up, and we got the GPS, and we got where we were going. But it's just interesting how we've come to rely on those things. And I think most people who are traveling today don't have any conception of what it was like to travel 50 years ago, as I don't, of what it was like to travel in the 1800s. Clearly, it was harder in 1970, but it was even harder in 1870.
Yeah, I totally get that. And I think the same, like when I was younger, me and my friend Ruth went to New Zealand doing a road trip. This is before we had smartphones. We had a GPS, but it didn't work. It worked for about 2 hours, and then it just died. So we were in the middle of New Zealand on our own. I think we were about 21 or something. I can't remember how old we were. And yeah, we were like, oh, what do we do now? So we actually went and bought maps, actual maps. Like, oh my gosh, I remember these. And we were just like looking at them. We were like, I've totally forgotten how to read a map. Like, it's so stupid. Like, you're so used to being able to look at a map and it tell you where you are, which is really helpful to see in relation to everything else. A normal map doesn't tell you that. You have to figure it out yourself. And we managed to figure it out, and we drove around for a week without any GPS. And we were so impressed with ourselves because, as you say, we come to rely on it. Actually, it kind of made it more fun because we didn't know where we were going. And we were like, actually, I'm kind of glad that the GPS died, like when we were in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, I totally get it. But I do prefer having just the safety net of your phone and being able to go on Google Maps and all that kind of stuff.
Sorry for the interruption, but I just have to tell you about Jessica Grace Coleman's new book, Intentional Travel Transformation. Boost your confidence, conquer your fears, and finally become the person you've always wanted to be, which is out now. This book is part memoir, part practical guide to help you transform yourself and your life through travel. Learn about Jessica's own tale of travel transformation, read unique transformation stories from the travel buddies she's met on the road, and make your way through her travel transformation framework, a method you can follow to create your very own bespoke travel transformation strategy. Your roadmap you can use to incorporate intentional travel into all your future trips. So, have you packed your bags yet? Because it's time to flip the script on your life and transform through travel. Get Intentional Travel Transformation now from Amazon, or head to www.traveltransformationcoach.com/books for more info. And now let's get back to the Travel Transformation Podcast.
You know that line, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yes.
So yeah, if things are easy, you don't appreciate them in the same way and you don't grow in the same way.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Okay, so you mentioned your book before, Always a Traveler, Never a Tourist, and you mentioned how you put it together in lockdown.
Yes, and I will show it really quickly.
Oh, I have seen the cover, but that's a big book. That's so nice. Wow.
It's about 300, mostly full-page photos, and some talks about the different countries and some of the anecdotes of when I visited there. What it's worth, the person on the front of the cover, people sometimes ask me, what is that front cover? This is a lady at a coming of age ceremony in the Omo region of Ethiopia. She's watching the young man who is, quote, coming of age, who's about 20, who does a very strange ceremony called jumping the bull. I would explain if you want to hear about it, but that's what the person is on the front cover.
Wow. And so obviously you were choosing photos from so many years of travels. How do you even start? Because when I go somewhere, even if I'm not somewhere as amazing as like living with a tribe, I take hundreds and hundreds of photos. How did you even start going through them and deciding what you wanted in the book? Were you just thinking about your favorite moments or your most interesting stories, or how did you start putting it together?
Well, it took a long time. And I've often said this book would not have happened if it wasn't for COVID, because I usually don't have that much time at home to just go through things and pull them together. And choosing the photos was a very time-consuming process. So, I mean, the first thing that happens is you get rid of the bad photos. So, you take 1,000 photos and maybe only 100 of them are any good when you actually look at them critically. But then how do you narrow it down from there? I wanted to make a book that, number one, reflected me, which is off the beaten path, and also was not just like every other book. There are no pictures of the Eiffel Tower in here. There's no pictures of Big Ben. What I am fascinated by are people. And I love looking at a beautiful scenery, a beautiful mountain or the ocean or whatever, but there are lots of photographers who do that better than I do. What I feel like my particular talent, if you will, is going to people who are not well known, who are disappearing, that the average person doesn't know anything about them, and giving them a voice and letting other people see cultures that may not be here in another 25 years. So I tried to focus on those kinds of things. What are the photos? What are the places in the world that most people will never go to? And so I've got a lot of photos from Papua New Guinea. I've got photos from Ethiopia, Bhutan, Western Mongolia, Senegal. These are places that people are curious about, and then they look at what would be involved in actually going there themselves, and they go, probably not. I'll wait for the National Geographic special on TV. So it's not that the people don't want to see these things, but they want to see it in a way that's easy for them to look at. And that was what I was trying to do.
Yeah, I love that. And so you visited lots of tribes and communities and things like this that you mentioned. How do you logistically go about organizing that? Are there companies that do it? How do you do it if someone else wants to try the same thing?
I try, first of all, not to go with a group if I can possibly avoid it. There are occasional times when you just have to. Earlier in my journey, I was more likely in really out of the way places like Papua New Guinea to go with a small group. Now I would be more likely to try and find a local guide and do an independent travel thing. But there's been an evolution over the years. I've never been into big group tours. What I do is I do a lot of research on the internet. I figure out what I would like to see. And then I kind of develop an RFP, a request for proposal, which is a business term, where you decide what your requirements are. And then you send that list of requirements out to a bunch of people and say, what can you do for me? The internet has been great in that regard because there are more smaller tour operators, smaller providers that have a voice that didn't 40 years ago. And so I sent to 6 or 7 different groups. Sometimes it's a private individual, sometimes it's a tour operator. I try to always use tour operators in the country rather than a big National Geographic or something. And I say, this is where I want to go. This is what I want to do. Come up with some proposals, or this is my tentative itinerary. Do you think it's good, or do you have recommendations? Usually what happens is there'll be one company or one person that'll get back to me that will think out of the box, which is more important to me than who comes back with the cheapest price for a thing that they pull together. So as an example, when I went to Bhutan, there's one international airport in Bhutan, and it's in the town of Paro. And so most people fly into Paro. They'll go as far as they can go for half a week. They'll get halfway to the middle of the country, and then they'll turn around and go back to Paro, which means they never see the eastern half of the country. And I wanted to see the eastern half of the country. Well, I contacted about 5 different providers. Most of them had me going in and out of Paro. And there was one guy who said, you know what? Guwahati, India, and I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but this place in India, their airport is a 2-hour drive from the border of Bhutan. You could fly into there, and we could have one of our people drive to the airport, pick you up, help you go across the border and enter Bhutan from the east. And then, and there's this festival that's going on in the east that I wanted to see, and so on. I was like, that's my guy, because he had a workaround. He found a way to do what the other guys couldn't figure out how to do. And over the years, I found a lot of people who are like that. But it only happens if you try and deal directly with local tour operators or local guides that are in the country. They have that kind of local knowledge.
So do you literally Google like tour operators in a certain country? Like, how do you find those people specifically?
Yeah. And I also, on various sites like TripAdvisor, a lot of people don't know that TripAdvisor has a forum. It's a different section of TripAdvisor than what most people use. And it's just a discussion board. And the people who are on the discussion board on TripAdvisor are similar travelers to my style of travel. They ask each other questions and they share, I had this guide, he was really great. This is his WhatsApp contact information or whatever. And you can do it that way. Thorntree is another that's run by Lonely Planet. It's a website that independent travelers discuss on. Facebook groups. I actually run my own Facebook group that is also called Always a Traveler, Never a Tourist. And I've got close to 800 people on it who are amazing travelers. And we share information about who to use, where to stay, how hard is it to get a visa in Algeria, which was a question that came up recently. So there is a community of people like that who can share information with each other.
Yeah, that's great. And we'll put the link to your Facebook group in the show notes as well, if anyone wants to join. And also, I didn't know that TripAdvisor had a forum, so I'm going to have to look that up now.
Yeah, you have to go, if you click I think it's like the 3 dots that gives you more options. And there's something, it's just called forum. And you drill down by, I think, continent, and then by country, and then by area within the country. And you find thousands of questions that people have asked, and you can ask your own questions as well.
Well, yeah, I'll definitely check that out. So these communities that you go and visit, like the woman on the cover of your book, Do they get a lot of foreign visitors? Like, how do they respond to you going there and meeting them? And do you find there's a big barrier in terms of language and all that kind of stuff? Like, how does it actually work?
Well, first of all, if I go to a place like the tribes in the Omo region of Ethiopia, I'm there with a guide who speaks the language. If I go to France, I don't need a guide. If I go to London, I don't need a guide. But in places that are really developing, you've got to have somebody who knows what's going on. And as I said, I always try to get somebody, not just somebody who's local in the country, but if possible, somebody who's local in that remote area. So, for example, when I went to Ethiopia, there were lots of travel agents I could find were based in Addis Ababa, which is the capital. But I found one who said he had grown up. He was living in Addis now, but he had grown up in the Omo. It's like, okay, well, you know that area. When I went to Western Mongolia, I didn't look for somebody who was in charge, who ran a travel company in Ulaanbaatar, which is the capital. I looked for somebody who had grown up in Western Mongolia, which is the eagle hunters and the nomadic peoples and so on. And there are people like that who have left those areas and come to the city, but they grew up in those areas. That's one thing. And, I've never wandered around a country, a remote area. And also the other thing is the infrastructure is a big deal. So Lewis and Clark explored the Mississippi River before anybody knew what it was, and they found local guides. I'm adventurous, but I'm not that adventurous. I want somebody who can handle the logistics of how do you go out in the desert where your van could break down and you have to carry replacement engines and stuff in your van because nobody's going to come to rescue you. I don't want to be dealing with that myself. We usually have somebody who can handle those kinds of things and also provide introductions to locals. When we went to Western Mongolia, we actually got to live in the ger, which is what they call a yurt, of a famous eagle hunter and his family. And we all stayed in one big room together. And then we got invited to a wedding of 300 Kazakh people because our guide actually knew the groom. We thought that when he said, do you want to go to a wedding this evening? We thought it was going to be like a demonstration wedding where people were going to dress up and say, this is how they did it in the old days, the typical tourist shtick. And we got there and no, there were 300 Kazakh people and us, and we were the celebrities because they were so thrilled to have an American at their wedding. But that's the kind of thing that you can only do if you're dealing with locals who are setting things up for you. There's a wealth of stuff on the internet. It's so different than it was when we first started traveling, when there was no internet. You won't find it in the top 10 results from a search engine. You got to go down to page 43 when the things start appearing that get less publicity. It's worth the effort.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned there you were staying in, I've forgotten the name, the yurt.
Oh, the ger. GER is what the Mongolians call their yurts.
With the other people who live there. For someone who's never experienced any kind of this sort of travel, how would you explain what it feels like to go somewhere like that and live with the locals and like a million miles away from what you're used to at home? What did you feel?
My element when I do that. I really find it energizing. And one of my favorite photographs is of my husband in the yurt with Ardak. Ardak was the name of our host, with Ardak's kids. And he took a picture with his iPad and showed it to them. And I took a picture of him showing the kids the pictures of themselves, which they didn't have a whole lot of opportunities to see that sort of thing. That's really what makes it exciting for me, is those connections and having people be as interested in you as you are in them. When you go on a group package tour of the mainstream variety, you're looking at them and they don't care at all about you. When you travel independently, it's amazing how fascinated people are by you. We forget about that. We're exotic to them. I have a great picture from Myanmar, which is what was formerly Burma, in a remote tribal area where we stopped at a little store to get a snack. And these four guys in complete like tribal attire come running out with one of them had a cell phone, and they all wanted to take a picture with me. So and then my husband took a picture of the same scene. So I have this picture, and it's me with the four tribal Burmese guys in very traditional dress. And everybody thinks that I asked them if I could take a picture with them. And that's not at all what happened. They were just like, oh, Western person. I can go home and show my friend that, look at me, I have a picture with a Western person. It works both ways. It's wonderful. And it's being able to share that humanity with people that most of us would never get to meet is great. I think if more people did that, we'd have fewer wars in the world, if we actually really got to know these people.
I think that too. I think the more you travel, the more you see the similarities between people and not the differences. And the more you realize that we're all going after the same things. We all have similar values and all that kind of stuff. Whereas people don't travel, they don't sort of get to know that on a real level. So what would you say is the biggest lesson you've learned from all of your travels?
Oh, wow. I think that we should be appreciative of the lives we have, that no matter how difficult things seem, that there are things in the world that we should be grateful. If we go there, we should feel grateful for what we have. The other thing is that we don't have the answers to everything. Americans particularly, and I know you're British, so I don't know what the audience for the show is going to be, but I will admit it. We Americans think we know the best about everything, and we're wrong. Sometimes we do, and a lot of times we don't. And when you travel, you learn that there are many ways of approaching everything, and we all have something to learn from one another. So I would say that probably is the biggest thing, that we should all keep our eyes open and make an attempt to learn from everybody, no matter who they are or where they are.
Yeah, I love that. Totally agree. Do you have any other tips on how to travel more as a traveler and not as a tourist, even if you're going to some of the touristy places, like if you're not necessarily going to visit tribes and things like that, because you've said about remote local guides and things, but if someone wants to try and get away from all the touristy stuff and be more of a traveler, what would you say to them?
There's a few things that we have done for many years that I could recommend that are not bank-breaking things. One is we have done quite a number of home exchanges. We've done about 10 of them all over the world, where we live in someone's house at the same time that they live in our house. You have to get over the idea that somehow these people are going to come and steal your TV and bring it back on the plane with them to their local country. But yeah, that's a great way to live as a local. Before we did home exchanges, and we're still involved in an organization called Servas, which a lot of people today know about couch surfing. Servas preceded couch surfing. It was started as an international peace-oriented organization about 60, 70 years ago. And people who are members stay in each other's houses for 2 days at a time, and they share meals, and sometimes they travel this, tour the city together. Sometimes they don't. But the main thing is that they interact at the person's home and get to know them. And it's not presented as a cheap way to travel, although there are no money exchanges hands, but it's presented as a way to get to know people internationally. The other thing is, there's lots of volunteer opportunities. Sometimes it's things where you're dealing with impoverished people in some place. Sometimes it's something to preserve the world, climate change, or cleaning the oceans, or whatever it is. There are lots of things based on what your personal interests are. But if you work as a volunteer, by definition, you're meeting other people, you're meeting local people. Maybe you're meeting people who are from other countries than the one you're staying in, but they're also volunteering. So I could be in France and meeting people from Germany or Spain or or Denmark who are volunteers on the same project. So I think all of those things are good ways to not be a tourist.
Yeah, definitely. And if you're meeting people, like you say, when you're volunteering, you already know that you probably share quite a few of the same values and you've already got things in common. So, it's a great way of meeting people as well as getting to know the local area and stuff like that. So that's cool. So you've been to so many countries. Do you have anywhere left that you haven't been to that you really want to go to?
I don't know if there's any place that's on my bucket list. I mean, if I die tomorrow, which I sincerely hope I won't, because I'll miss out on the trip to Malta and Tunisia, but I would feel like I've had a wonderful experience of travel and I've seen all the places I really, really want to see. But I would love to go to some of the Silk Road countries, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. I would love to go to some other places in Africa, although I've been to 10 different countries in Africa. I get energized by reading travel accounts of other, like in the Facebook group that I run, people say, I've been here, I've been there. And it's like, oh, I never thought about that. Somebody just mentioned a festival in Chad. And I'm like, oh, that's in Africa, by the way. Chad is like, that wasn't on my list, but that sounds like a really cool place. I think maybe I want to go there. So I've never met a country that I didn't want to go to, but there's no place that like, oh, I have to get there before I.
Yeah, I mean, you've already done so many, like you say, like you're doing well.
Right. And I'm not one of these people, and I know people who are like this, who are like, I'm on my 153rd country and I'm hoping to make 160 by the end of the year. I don't travel to all these different places because I'm trying to like win the lottery. I travel because, oh, this is interesting and it's maybe different from this other place and I want to know about it. There is a big difference in that regard. Not all widely traveled people are the same. We're going for the same reason.
Yeah, definitely. And I find some people who do the checklist and they want to check off all the countries and things. Sometimes they've just gone to a place for a day or a few hours just to say they could go and haven't actually seen any of it. So yeah, I much prefer slower travel and actually experiencing a place when I'm there, definitely. Okay, so just before we go, 2 more questions, very short questions. Where can people find and follow you online? And also, is there anything else you want to mention or talk about, or just any messages you want to say before we go?
Okay, well, online, my primary presence is on Facebook. I do have a Instagram presence, but it's not a super active Instagram presence. I have a Facebook page called Always a Traveler, Never a Tourist. And I also have a Facebook group, which is called Always a Traveler, Never a Tourist. And people can interact with me on both. The big difference between the two is that the page is mostly things that I post. People can comment, but I'm doing the posting. The group is open to anybody who is, I would say, an aspirational traveler, an avid traveler. You don't have to have been to 120 different countries to join that group, but you have to be interested in learning about other places in the world. So please, if you want to contact me on Facebook, you can message me too, and I will be happy to respond to you. You might even put the Travel Transformation Podcast at the beginning of your message, so I'll know how you found me.
Yeah, definitely. So the book, people can find it on Amazon. Is that right?
You can find it on Amazon. Yes, it's available in a paperback version and in a Kindle version. And do you have Kindle Unlimited in the UK? Because
Yes.
It's also, okay, if you belong to Kindle Unlimited, it's also on Kindle Unlimited. So people can access it that way. And if anybody who is hearing this in the US would like an autographed copy, I can send you an autographed copy if you contact me on Facebook or message me. So I could send you one in the UK as well, but the cost would be prohibitive for postage probably. But yeah, in the UK, I would say probably go to Amazon.
Great. And yeah, definitely check it out because I've only seen like a few photos from it and even those are like really cool and fascinating and it makes you want to know more about your journey. So it looks like a really great book. You did a really good job. Okay, so
thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. And thank you for coming on the podcast today. It's been so fascinating talking to you and hearing about all your amazing adventures. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for inviting me. I've loved being here.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Travel Transformation Podcast with me, Jessica Grace Coleman. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review and spread the word if you have friends or family who also want to transform through travel. For a chance of winning one of my books in ebook form, please review this podcast on Apple Podcasts and send a screenshot or just your name to info@traveltransformationcoach.com or at Travel Transformation Coach on Instagram. I'll be picking a new winner each month, and you can choose between any of my non-fiction titles, including Write Your Life, Write Your Year, and Intentional Travel Transformation. You can find out more about me at traveltransformationcoach.com, where you can also get your free travel transformation guide. And until next time, I'll catch you on the flip side. Bye.